Okay, my friends, heading into Passover, so you're expecting a lot of people to talk about Passover, but I'm passing over Passover here today and going straight into Spirit Omer. For those who want some teachings on Passover, so we're going to include some today, obviously, also. But then also, we also talked about Passover last week. We did a rundown through about half the Haggadah or so. So if you want that, you can get the recording. Hold on a second. They just put the heat on in here. I don't know what's going on with them. Give me a second here. Joe, mind turning off the heat? It's getting warm in here. It's hard like that. Thanks. All right, and we're back. So here we go. So my friends, we're about to get into Pesach, and so we're gonna talk about the Spirit of Omer, the weeks of the Omer from a kabbalistic perspective, and introduce what we're going to be doing, God willing, for the next 7 weeks after this. And that's really what this conversation is all about. Let's begin with what Pesach is from a kabbalistic perspective. Okay, if you want to get to the essence of anything, there's a kabbalistic secret for this, and we mentioned it here before. And that is, if you want to get to the essence of something, you want to go to the name of the thing. That in the name of the thing lies the essence of the thing. Where do you see this? This is easily seen from the beginning of the Torah. That the name of the thing is the root of the thing. The first, when God created the world, we see it says, "Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz." In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. However, if you look a little closer, you see those words, "Bereshit bara Elokim." In the beginning, God created et. What's et? What does et mean in English? Et does not have a direct translation in English. Does that mean it's extra? No, there's nothing that's extra in the Torah. And so therefore, take a look. The word et says the Maggid of Mezrich, one of the great Hasidic masters. Et is the letter Aleph and Taf. That in the beginning, God created Aleph to Taf, the Hebrew language, like from A to Z, from Aleph to Taf, He created the Hebrew language, and then Hashem uses the Hebrew language in order to create the Shemayim and the Aretz, the heavens and the earth. And so therefore we see that at the root of anything is the letters that make it up in the Hebrew language. Another example of this is that we see that when God creates the world, He creates the world with speech, right? In the beginning, so similar idea here is that at the root of anything, the speech is at the root of the thing is an expression of the speech. Easiest example for that is, how do you say to speak in Hebrew? Lidaber. How do you say a thing in Hebrew? Davar. It's the same, essentially it's the same word. And it's the same Hebrew letters that make up the word, because the speech is at the root of the thing, and the thing is an expression of the speech. And so, l'chaim everybody, by the way. I made the blessing before you guys were on. Judge me favorably, okay? So, beginning this conversation, if we want to understand what Pesach is all about, very simply, we want to go to the name of the thing, right? The name of Pesach. What does Pesach mean? We mentioned that everyone knows Pesach means to pass over. But the way we usually look at that is straight out of the story of the Jewish people leaving Egypt. That Hashem passed over the houses of the Egyptians as He went ahead and, you can say Hashem, as when the Makat Bechor, when the plague of the firstborns was happening. So there was a passing over of the. Hold on 1 second. Again, I'm getting a delivery. God bless you. Thank you. I got in the middle of class. Thank you. Thank you. You're awesome. Guys, I got coffee. So, moving right along here. Sorry. So typically that's how we understand this, correct? The thing is, kabbalistically we say it's more than just that Hashem passed over the houses of the Jews when He went through killing the firstborn of the Egyptians, right? The idea is that anytime we have a holiday in Judaism, it's not just something that we're remembering from the past, right? There's something, the idea is that every holiday is a holy day. that there's something going on right there, right then on that particular day. And so we want to understand what that is. And so in Kabbalah, they say that that what's happening on Passover is there's a complete passing over of levels, a complete freedom from the level that you're at. Now, usually in life, we experience whatever spiritual level we're at, more or less. Passover night, Seder night, is a time where we can bust out of that place that we're in and get to wherever it is that we want to go. You know what I mean? And this is the idea that we can that there is a unique opportunity for a grand high on Passover. It's considered in Kabbalah the highest night of the year in a certain way. And this is the reason why, because there's a mass opportunity to experience a grand high beyond wherever you're at. And that's what happens on Passover. However, what happens the day after Passover, the day after Seder night, right? Well, what goes up must come down. This is the problem, right? Not a problem, this is just reality, right? What happens is there's a grand high, and then we come down from that high. And when we come down from that high, there's a feeling of, on the one hand, there's a feeling, there might be a little bit of a feeling of loss, that we've lost something, but on the other hand, we just saw how high we can get. There was a grand opening so Passover night is a grand opening of a portal. It opens the opportunity to grow, the opportunity to climb, right? That's what Sfirat Omer is all about. That at first there's this initiation, this burst of energy, this high, but then we come down from that, and then the question is, can we go ahead and build up back towards that? That's what Sfirat Omer is all about. The thing is that now we have to do it now we have to go ahead and go into the reality of who we are, go into the level of where we are at, and then level by level work on ourselves to grow back to that place. And then hopefully we will be, by the time we come around to Shavuot at the end of the process, hopefully we will be in a strong and solid place on that high, but now it's something we've built to. Now we're really there. It's not just something we had this grand boost, right? In Kabbalah, this is referred to as an itaruta de le'ela and itaruta de le'tata, an awakening from above versus an awakening from below. An awakening from above is Passover Seder night, a grand burst of inspiration. It's something that I can get to a level that I didn't really build myself up to. And so that's nice. And we stay at that level, and it's real. We do experience it. We do experience that level, but we're not really holding at that level. And so we come down to wherever it is we're holding at afterwards. And then can we go ahead and then hopefully we awaken ourselves from below to go ahead and build back up to that in a real way. And this is the process of Passover, Sfirat Omer, Shavuot. Right, Shavuot is the conclusion, the product, what we get up to once we've built ourselves up through the process of Sfirat Omer, right? Through the process of going through those weeks in which we will work on ourselves. And the truth is, this is how every relationship tends to work as well. This is how growth tends to work. Everything we just said is how growth tends to work. Because if you think about it, let's think about a relationship, right? Imagine guy meets gal. Like how does it happen, right? Like there you have a guy standing in one corner of the room, and you have a gal, right? Imagine you're at a party, right? And there's a guy standing in one corner of the room, gal standing in another corner of the room, and they're both looking around the room. And then right there in the middle of the room, their eyes meet, and fireworks, right? Now, if afterwards, let's say you're friends with the girl and you say afterwards, wow, you just went out on this first date, or wow, you met this amazing guy, you think he's the love of your life. That's amazing. Like, okay, like what's his last name? Afterwards, she'd be like, you know what? Actually, I don't know, right? What does that mean to say? But here a person was feeling like they found their soulmate, their destiny, all these words. And they don't even know so meaning to say they feel the experience of that moment or the experience of their first meeting with this person, right? Their experience of their first date, whatever it is way up here at love of my life. Yet the reality of their relationship is holding right down here on ground level at the level of don't even know his last name. So am I saying that the experience, the high experience is artificial? No. That experience is a real experience. You're feeling that high, just that the reality of your relationship isn't holding that high. And that can't last. Meaning that the relationship starts, just like we learned from Kabbalah in terms of our relationship with Hashem, in terms of this process of Passover, our relationships seem to work this way throughout. A grand high, burst of inspiration, lovey-dovey, love at first sight. And then what happens is, at some point, like that's a burst of inspiration. At some point, though, what happens? At some point, you got to get back to reality, right? But then, hopefully, you've opened up a portal. Hopefully, you've seen the potential of what perhaps this could be, right? Perhaps it could be that. Perhaps we can get there. And so then hopefully, even when I'm down and not feeling that anymore, I'm inspired to like, hey, this is where it could go. This is the relationship I want to build towards. And then we see who's who, right? And so this is like you see this in Hollywood and movies and stuff like this. Well, we fell in love and then we fell out of love. Okay, but the story doesn't mean that's why you broke up. That doesn't mean that you have to break up necessarily, right? It just means that like, okay, that phase is gone, that initial romance or initial infatuation or whatever it is. It shouldn't be totally gone, like there should be a level of it, right? But then, okay, can I go ahead and like build this relationship into something meaningful and lasting, right? So it's not a reason necessarily to be like, oh, I got shot by Cupid, but then the poison or whatever it is wore off and I got to wait for Cupid to shoot me again, right? No. Right. The point is that we're able to go ahead and then even if there's a coming back down to reality of where your relationship is, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing unhealthy about going back to the reality of the fact that you just met this person yesterday. But you do hopefully see the potential and you can hopefully build towards it. Right. And this is the Pesach high followed by the fall from grace, if you will, but then hopefully building up during the time of Sfirat Omer, and then ultimately getting to whatever level we built to on the holiday of Shuvuot. By the way, this also explains why the holiday of Shuvuot is called Shuvuot. Because again, we said, if you want to get to the essence of what any holiday is, take a look at the name, right? Pesach is a passing over of levels. What's Shuvuot mean? Shavuot's by the way, you ask anyone on the street, like, why is Shuvuot called Shuvuot? It's a very strange name for a holiday, especially the holiday that we're celebrating, the giving of the Torah. Right? After all, the giving of the Torah, you'd think it would be pretty darn important in Judaism, right? You'd think they'd freaking call this Torah Day. But no, they do not. Yes, actually, that phraseology does show up in the prayers at certain locations, but really we call the holiday of Shuvuot. And why? Because Shuvuot means weeks, referring to the 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuot. So at first glance, you'd ask the question, like, that sounds like a pretty anticlimactic name for Grand Torah Day of Judaism, right? You'd think that, like, imagine you called Rosh Hashanah, imagine instead of calling Rosh Hashanah, which means the head of the year, like they call it the Jewish New Year, imagine instead of calling it New Year or the head of the year, we'd call it previous 364 days of the year. That would be pretty anticlimactic, don't you think? Yet that's exactly what we are doing when it comes to the holiday of Shavuot. Instead of being like, yo, Torah Day, we're calling it previous 7 weeks. Pretty whack, no? So, of course, the answer is very clear from everything we're laying out. The idea is that the experience of that you're going to have on Torah Day, the way that you're going to experience the manner you're going to take in the Torah, is going to be based on the sum total of the inner work and transformation and process you go through in the 7 weeks preceding Torah Day, in the 7 weeks preceding the holiday of Shavuot. Do you hear that idea? So that means to say that Shavuot is only going to be Torah day for you to the extent you made yourself into a person that's open to receiving the Torah the 7 weeks prior. Right? And so that's what we're going to be working on over the process of Sfirat Omer. How are we going to be working on that exactly? So I'm going to tell you in a second. But first, I saw someone put a little comment in here. Hold on a second. Hey, Kimmy G. All right, hold on a second. Goal to work towards maintenance of that high. Yes, yeah, something like that. Except we're going to be very real with the fact that we're not really on that high. Meaning to say, it's not like, okay, I'm starting you off with an A in the class, and now you got to maintain that A. We're not really saying that 100%. What we're saying is that you have grand capacity to experience this high of Passover. But now we're back in reality of where you're really holding, right? So it's not like you're maintaining that high. No, we're recognizing there is a fall. But we also are drawing from that inspiration of that high and going to go ahead and build ourselves to be that, to live that, to be on that high level. Cool? Cool. L'chaim. So back to our question, which is, all right, so how, pray tell, are we going to build to that high? How are we going to build to become that person who's open to receiving the Torah on Shuvuot? So there's a very, very foundational and fundamental teaching in Judaism that before before Torah becomes being a mensch, or to put it in the classic teachings, derech eretz kadma leTorah, that before we can be a Jew, we have to be a human being, right? Let's explain what we mean by that, right? Because what we're saying essentially is that what does it mean to be a human being as opposed to be an animal, for example? Okay, spiritually, we understand that a human being has a human soul as opposed to an animal, which has what's called an animal soul. But the human being also does have that animal side to themselves. Correct? Correct. So what does it mean to be a human being? What it means to be a human being is to be conscious, right? Is to be what they're calling nowadays mindful, is to be spiritual. What do we mean by spirituality? That's often misunderstood. Let's talk about that now for a second, right? And by spirituality here, I'm not even getting Jewish yet. I'm just holding on the level of humanhood, of humanity. Again, the difference between a human being and an animal is the idea that the human being has a human soul and animal has what's called an animal soul. Well, how does that difference show itself? How does that human soul show itself? So I'll share with you one fundamental way. And that is that we have the capacity to, and this is what Pesach is all about really, to free ourselves, but to free ourselves from ourselves, right? That's what real freedom is going to mean. Just like it says, Ezehu Gibor in Pirkei Avot, Ezehu Gibor, who's the strong person, HaKoveshet Yitzro, the one who conquers their inclination. Meaning to say, it doesn't say the one who can lift the most weight, the one who can lift the most pounds or kilos. It says the one who, the strong person is, we're talking about inner strength here, is the person who has mastery over themselves. Mastery over themselves. So, what does that mean? That means that I'm able to, even though just like an animal has pulls in all sorts of other directions, inclinations, instincts, etc., so too all of us do. We all have that. We all have that animal side of ourselves that's powering us, right? And we can be talking about physical things, physical desires, but also just in general, emotional stuff that pulls us one way or another, our programming, our habits, our characteristics can be pulling us into all sorts of directions. The human being, what person expresses their humanhood when they're able to take a step back from their pull towards a certain thing, from their pull towards a certain reaction, from their autopilot response. A person's able to pull themselves back from that and say, hold on a second. Who do I want to be in this moment? What direction do I want to go in? What kind of person do I want to choose to be in this moment, right? Like famous self-help guru Stephen Covey would say, the measure of a person can be seen in the space they put between stimulus and response. That's a deep quote right there. Right? The measure of a person can be seen in the space they put between stimulus and response. What does that mean? It means stimulus happens, something happens from the outside. Someone's nagging you, someone's bothering you, you feel like someone screwed you over. How do you respond in that moment? So some of us are without thinking, almost all of us, unless we're masters, have a reaction. So some of us think it's us first and foremost, right? You ever say, I'm angry? Really? Because I thought your name was Bob. But you're calling yourself angry. So that means that you've totally lost ownership of yourself and your identity in this situation. Do you hear that idea? You've let the midah, the characteristic, the attribute, the emotion of anger take over to the point that it is running the ship, to the point that you even gave it your name and identity, right? So better would be to be not only say, but to also experience, I'm feeling anger right now. Do you hear and do you feel the difference between I'm angry versus I'm feeling angry or I'm feeling anger? And by the way, even better than that would be the feeling of anger is coming up for me. I feel the feeling of anger coming up for me right now. What does that mean then? That means that I'm not forced to respond. I'm not automatically going to respond exactly, Kimmy, with whatever that feeling is that's arising. Like there's a distance between me and the feeling. Do you hear that idea? There's like, it's there, it's within me, it's coming up, but like there's also me, and I can like choose to embrace it, or I can choose to be like, I hear you, anger, I acknowledge you, I see that you're there. We'll bring you, you'll come out a little bit later. I want to be a person who exercises certain other characteristic in this moment, right? So now, to the extent we do gain a mastery over our emotions and over our responses, so then welcome to being a human being. Until then, we are technically a human being. You have that human soul, but you're not, that human soul isn't being lived out, right? Do you hear that idea? And so in order to truly be able to live the Torah, the prerequisite is you have to be functioning like a human being. Now that might sound a little crazy, but I'm going to prove to you why. It's very simple. Because the Torah is going to tell you, listen, in this kind of situation, do this. And in that kind of situation, do that. If you don't have mastery over yourself, if you don't have mastery over your characteristics, if you don't have an ownership over your emotional responses, so then the Torah ain't going to do you any good because you aren't capable of doing what the Torah is telling you to do. Now we can reverse engineer it. The Torah told me to not act with anger in this particular situation. So now I have to go into myself and become a human being in order to keep the Torah. Okay, we could reverse engineer it in that way. But philosophically, if we have mastery over ourselves and we're able to remove ourselves from a different programming and emotional mess and all this stuff and trauma, not to mention, and expectations, all this, we could get into a lot of this stuff throughout the next number of weeks. Then we can free ourselves from those things, put some separation and space between the different stuff that's coming in and then the stuff that's going out. So then, okay, then already we can hear, hopefully, what the Torah has to say and go ahead and live in alignment with it. But until we have that mastery, so the Torah is going to fall on deaf ears in a certain respect, right? And so this is the kind of stuff we're working on. This emotional stuff and personal ownership stuff is what we're going to be working on over the next 7 weeks, God willing, leading up to the holiday of Shuvuot, right, is going into our different characteristics and understanding them and getting in touch with them, taking ownership over them, recognizing how to use them, and not be used by them. Do you hear that idea? Some people are you could get so into one trait and you take on the identity of that trait. But if you're not able to say no to that trait when that trait becomes the unhealthy response, then guess what? You're not actually using that trait to the positive. The trait has taken mastery and ownership over the ship. Right? And so then that means, for example, let's take the trait of kindness. If you cannot restrain the kindness in a particular moment where kindness wouldn't be the right thing based on the person you're dealing with or based on your own personal situation, then it's no longer then your act of kindness is no longer kindness, is it? Right? Even when you're doing the kindness, it's not coming from a place of choice. It's coming from who knows what, societal pressures, feeling the need to have a certain identity and title, being known for something, being insecure with saying no to someone's asking you to do a favor, all sorts of things which, God willing, we're actually going to talk about next week. But the point is that if you're not free to not be kind, then when you are being kind, is your kindness really kindness? So there's two ways of looking at it. There's the external way, there's the internal way. Externally, well, you still did a favor for that person. They still received that favor on that level. Yeah, it was kindness. Internally, wasn't kindness. It didn't come from a free place of giving. It can come from a free place of choice. It came from some way that it was manipulated out of you, mostly by your own mindset, right? So these are the kind of things we're going to speaking of, and I want to go through just real quick with you guys just the different midot, the different attributes we're going to be speaking about, right? Because over the next 7 weeks, God willing, the first week we speak about the concept of chesed, the second week the concept of gvura. We're going to go through all of them right now, just do a 1-minute overview on each of them, and then call it a day. So here it goes. So chesed, first and foremost, like we just mentioned, the first week is the concept of giving forth, is the concept of extending yourself to another, right? We're going to speak about it, God willing, more, but this idea, it actually parallels in the person the concept of the right hand or the right arm, the concept of giving forth. Chas dalid, chesed, chas dalid is compassion on dalid. Dalid is the one who doesn't have, from the word dal, which means poor. So there's a giving forth that's going on, right? Gvura is the concept of withholding, right, or restraining, or having borders, boundaries. We're going to talk about that a lot as well. And by the way, everything we're talking about here, all of these classes over the next 7 weeks, God willing, are going to have to do with finding a place of emotional intelligence, finding a place of emotional health within all of it, how to have this trait. And so some of us will be rooted in certain traits that we find stronger. Some of us will be weaker in certain traits and think like, oh, that's just not me. Anything that you say that's just not me, all it means is that you haven't used that and been that up till now. Doesn't mean that it's not you. The only reason you say it's not you is because it hasn't been you up until this point. But we're all working to come to a place, hopefully, of health and balance. And this is what people don't understand. The Sfirot in Kabbalah are called the Sfirot, but also in the more ancient books, they're referred to as a midot, which means often translated in English as characteristics. But characteristics isn't really the sum total of that translation. A better translation, an additional translation would be emotional intelligence. Right? Meaning to say, your characteristics are going to be based on the level of emotional intelligence you have. So that emotional intelligence is what's going on in the inside that goes ahead and fosters your characteristics on the outside, right? And so we're going to hopefully be working on that internal point, on that internal aspect, understanding these different traits, what they're all about, and then also when we have to move away from those traits, because taking something to an extreme ends up being destructive and not healthy. And so what we're going to be looking at is identifying these traits, clarifying them, seeing how they can take us into a negative place, and then hopefully how we can go ahead and live with them in a healthy, balanced, free, choice-oriented, awesome way. right? So we got chesed, right? We also said gevura is a concept of boundaries and giving, showing inner strength and ability to have inner strength. Tiferet has to do with this concept of a beauty that's born from balance, a beauty that's born from knowing when to utilize what, which also gets down to knowing who you are and having proper self-esteem and confidence versus ego and insecurity. And yes, those two go together, and we'll talk about that, God willing, when the time comes. And the next two, and that corresponds to the torso, it's like where you're at. The next two are netzach and hod. Netzach is the concept of dominance, of knowing, like, sometimes you're met with a challenge. Do I go ahead and face that challenge head on and to become victorious, hopefully, over it? Or is the proper response the other side of things, what's called left leg, which is hod, which means essentially submissiveness. And there's a time for that. There's a time to step back there's a time to step back, to hold your breath, duck underwater, let the challenge, the wave that's coming your way pass over, and then come up and live to see another day. There's absolutely a time for that. But then again, there's a way you can take that very unhealthily. If that becomes your go-to all the time, then there's something off with that, right? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about where it all comes from and how it can go ahead and grow. Yesod is the concept of connection, relationship, and how we deal with connections, how we deal with relationships. And then Malchut is the last concept of actualization, of product, of receiving, of vulnerability. And we're going to talk about that too. And we're going to understand also the strength of vulnerability, which vulnerability usually gets a kind of like a bad rap, right? Most people's feeling when their word associate, if we play a word association game with your average person on the street and say, okay, what's the first word that comes to mind? Vulnerability. Most people will say weakness. But we're going to show vulnerability in a totally different way, and how you see it's the biggest strength. So anyway, this is what we're going to be working towards, God willing, over the seven coming weeks. I hope this is a worthwhile introduction. And the point is, on Pesach, is the idea of that macro freedom from everything, freedom from all these restraints, freedom from my programming, my bindot, etc. So it's the klali, it's the grand freedom. But then the point is, over the next 7 weeks, to go into the details and become free in this level and free in that level, and free ourselves in terms of how we're acting in the nitty-gritty details of our lives, right? Okay, questions, thoughts, ideas. What say you guys? Okay then. Hope this is clear. Hope this is helpful. Hope this is worthwhile. And I hope you'll join me on our 7-week journey beginning next week. I wish everyone a great Passover. For those who are firstborn guys, and you're familiar with that fast of the firstborn thing, that is actually tomorrow morning. Interestingly enough, it's an interesting year. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for joining. Thank you for spending time. And hopefully we'll see you all in a week. Have yourselves a great one. Yes, Chag Sameach to everybody.